You think you can just keep all that money to yourself? That's not how families work, Angela. My father's voice echoed through the living room of my small rental apartment in Portland, Oregon. I stood there, arms crossed, watching my parents tower over me with expressions I'd seen too many times before, entitlement mixed with barely concealed rage. My name is Angela, and I'm 27 years old. Up until 3 weeks ago, I was living a modest life as a graphic designer for Brightvale Mining, earning just enough to cover rent and student loans. My relationship with my parents had always been strained, but I never imagined it would come to this. Standing in my own home, being screamed at because I refused to hand over an inheritance that was rightfully mine. My grandmother passed away 6 weeks ago. She was the only person in my family who ever truly saw me, who supported my dreams when my parents dismissed them as childish fantasies. While they pushed me toward practical careers and sensible choices, Grandma Eleanor encouraged me to pursue art, to follow my heart, to build a life that made me happy, rather than one that looked impressive to others. The funeral had been tense. My parents barely spoke to me, which wasn't unusual. My older brother, Timothy, had flown in from Seattle with his wife, and they'd spent the entire service whispering about estate details while I grieved alone in the back row. Even in death, my family couldn't set aside their obsession with money and status long enough to mourn properly. Then came the reading of the will. I'll never forget the moment Grandma's attorney, a composed woman named Beverly, opened the envelope and began reading. My parents sat forward in their chairs, confident smiles on their faces. Timothy straightened his expensive tie. They all assumed the bulk of the estate would be divided equally, maybe with a slight preference toward Timothy since he'd followed in my father's footsteps and become a financial analyst. Beverly's voice was steady as she read through the document. Small bequests to various charities, a few family heirlooms distributed among relatives. Then she reached the main provision, and the room fell silent. To my beloved granddaughter Angela, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including all financial assets, properties, and investments, valued at approximately $28 million. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before chaos erupted. My mother actually shrieked. My father jumped from his chair, demanding to see the document. Timothy's face turned an alarming shade of purple as he shouted about undue influence and mental incompetence. His wife started crying, talking about how unfair it was, how they had children to think about, how they'd been counting on that money for their future. I sat there, numb with shock, barely processing what had just happened. $28 million. It was an unfathomable sum. I'd known Grandma was comfortable, but I'd never imagined anything like this. Beverly had been prepared for their reaction. She calmly explained that the will was ironclad, drafted 5 years earlier when Eleanor was unquestionably of sound mind. There were multiple witnesses, medical evaluations on record, everything properly documented. She also mentioned that Eleanor had anticipated family conflict and had included a detailed letter explaining her decision, which she'd given to Beverly with instructions to share it with me privately. My parents refused to accept it. They spent the next hour arguing, threatening legal action, insisting the will must be invalid. Beverly remained professional but firm, eventually asking them to leave her office. Before we parted, she handed me a sealed envelope and told me to read it when I was alone. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened Grandma's letter. Her handwriting was shaky but clear, and reading her words felt like hearing her voice one last time. She wrote about watching me grow up in a family that never valued who I was. She described the pain of seeing my parents favor Timothy, of watching them dismiss my talents and belittle my choices. She'd seen how they treated me like an afterthought, how they only called when they needed something, how they'd never once acknowledged my accomplishments or supported my struggles. "You are the only one who visited me because you wanted to, not because you felt obligated," she wrote. "You're the only one who asked about my day, who remembered my stories, who treated me like a person rather than a bank account waiting to be inherited. This money is yours because you were the only one who gave me something money can't buy, Genuine love and companionship. Don't let them take it from you, Angela. Build the life you deserve. I cried for an hour after reading that letter. Now, 3 weeks later, my parents were in my apartment, making their latest attempt to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. "We're your parents," my mother said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Surely Eleanor didn't intend for you to keep everything while your own family struggles." I almost laughed. Struggled? My father was a senior partner at Cinderglow Textiles. My mother drove a luxury car and spent her weekends at the country club. Timothy pulled in 6 figures and owned a house in one of Seattle's most expensive neighborhoods. "Grandma's will was very clear," I said quietly. "The money is mine." My father's expression darkened. "We'll see about that." The threat started the next day. My father called at 7 in the morning, his voice cold and measured. "We've consulted with our attorney. There are grounds to contest the will. Mental incompetence, undue influence, fraud. We'll explore every avenue. You can avoid all this unpleasantness by doing the right thing." I hung up without responding. My mother tried a different approach. She showed up at my workplace, tears streaming down her face, creating a scene in Brightvale Mining's lobby. She talked about family loyalty, about how hurt they were, about how Grandma must have been confused in her final years. My coworkers stared as she grabbed my hands, begging me to reconsider, to remember all the sacrifices they'd made raising me. I gently but firmly escorted her out, my face burning with embarrassment. Timothy sent a long email detailing how much he and his wife had been counting on inheritance money for their children's education. He painted a picture of desperate financial need, conveniently forgetting to mention his summer home in the San Juan Islands or the European vacation they'd just returned from. I wanted to believe it was about more than money. I wanted to think some part of them actually cared about family, about relationships, about me, but their actions proved otherwise. Not once did any of them ask how I was doing, whether I was okay, if I needed support while grieving Grandma. It was all demands, threats, and manipulation. Beverly had warned me this would happen. During our private meeting after the will reading, she'd explained that sudden wealth often brought out the worst in families. She'd seen it dozens of times. Relatives who barely spoke to each other suddenly claiming deep bonds and moral obligations the moment money entered the picture. "Your grandmother knew this would be difficult for you," Beverly had said. "That's why she set up additional protections. The inheritance is held in a trust with very specific terms. Even if someone tried to sue, the trust structure makes it nearly impossible to break. She also included funds specifically designated for legal defense, should you need it." I hadn't fully appreciated those protections until my family launched their campaign. My father's attorney sent a formal letter demanding I voluntarily surrender 80% of the inheritance to be divided among immediate family members. The letter was filled with legal-sounding language about moral obligations and family duty, but Beverly dismissed it as an intimidation tactic with no legal standing. "They're hoping you'll panic and settle," she explained. "Don't engage. Let me handle all communications." But my family wasn't content with legal threats alone. My mother began calling my extended relatives, painting me as a selfish, greedy person who'd manipulated a sick old woman for money. She told elaborate lies about how I'd isolated Grandma from the family, how I'd poisoned her mind against them, how I'd essentially stolen what belonged to everyone. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called to lecture me about family values. Aunts and uncles who'd never shown interest in my life suddenly had strong opinions about how I should handle my inheritance. The story my mother had crafted spread through our family like wildfire, and almost everyone believed it without question. Almost everyone. My cousin Stephanie reached out privately. She was 32, lived in Sacramento, and had always been perceptive about family dynamics. "I'm not buying what your mom is selling," she said during our phone call. "I remember how they treated you growing up. I remember the way they talked about you when you weren't around. Whatever Grandma Eleanor decided, I'm sure she had good reasons." That conversation meant more to me than she probably realized. In a sea of accusations and demands, Having one person believe in me felt like a lifeline. The situation escalated when my father and Timothy showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening. My father's face was stern, businesslike. Timothy looked uncomfortable but determined. "We need to talk," my father said, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. They sat on my couch, and my father laid out what he called a reasonable compromise. I would place the inheritance in a family trust, with equal access for all immediate family members. I'd receive a salary from the trust, of course, but major financial decisions would require majority approval. "This way, everyone benefits," he said. "It's what Eleanor would have wanted if she'd really thought it through." "Grandma did think it through," I replied. "For 5 years, apparently. She knew exactly what she was doing." Timothy leaned forward. "Angela, be realistic. You're 27 years old. You have no experience managing this kind of wealth. You'll make mistakes, lose money, get taken advantage of by people who don't have your best interests at heart. Let us help you. Let us protect you." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. The people claiming to want to protect me were the same ones who'd spent weeks threatening and manipulating me. "I appreciate your concern," I said, keeping my voice level. "But the answer is no. The inheritance is mine, and I'll manage it as I see fit." My father's expression hardened. "You're making a serious mistake. We've been patient, but our patience has limits. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." "Then I guess you'll have to do what you think is necessary," I replied, "just as I'm doing what I know is right." They left angry, slamming my apartment door hard enough to rattle the frames on my walls. I stood there in the silence afterward, hands shaking, wondering how my life had become this nightmare. Losing Grandma had been devastating enough. Now I was losing what remained of my family too, not through death, but through their own greed and entitlement. The lawsuit arrived 2 weeks later. Beverly had predicted it, but seeing the actual legal documents still felt like a punch to the gut. My parents and Timothy were jointly contesting the will, claiming Eleanor had lacked mental capacity, that I'd exercised undue influence, and that the distribution was unconscionable given normal family expectations. I called Beverly immediately, my voice tight with stress. "Can they actually win this?" "Extremely unlikely," she assured me. "Your grandmother was thorough. We have medical records proving her competence. We have testimony from her doctors, her financial advisors, her friends. We have the fact that she drafted this will 5 years ago, not in her final days. And most importantly, we have her detailed statement explaining her reasoning, which demonstrates clear, rational thought." "But they're still going to drag this out, aren't they?" "Probably," Beverly admitted. "These cases can take months, sometimes over a year. They're likely hoping you'll get tired of fighting and offer a settlement." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma's letter, about how she'd wanted me to build the life I deserved. Instead, I was trapped in legal battles with my own family, spending my days stressed and anxious, unable to enjoy or even properly process the gifts she'd given me. I'd taken a leave of absence from Brightvale Mining. My boss had been understanding, but I could see the concern in her eyes. The stress was affecting everything: my work, my health, my relationships. I'd lost 8 pounds. I wasn't sleeping. My few close friends worried about me. The worst part was how isolated I felt. My family had succeeded in turning most of our extended relatives against me. People I'd known my whole life now viewed me as the villain in a story my mother had carefully crafted. Even people who didn't know the full situation seemed to assume there must be something wrong with me if my own parents were suing me. Stephanie checked in regularly, which helped, but she lived 5 hours away and had her own life to manage. Beverly was professional and supportive, but ultimately she was my attorney, not my friend. I'd never felt more alone. Then came the day that changed everything. I was meeting with Beverly in her office, going over documents for the lawsuit, when her assistant knocked urgently on the door. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are two people in the lobby insisting they need to speak with Angela immediately. They say it's about Eleanor's estate. My stomach dropped. Had my parents sent someone to harass me at my attorney's office? Beverly frowned. Did they give names? A man named Gregory and a woman named Patricia. They said they're representatives from Thistleford Security. I glanced at Beverly, confused. She looked equally puzzled. I don't know what Thistleford Security is. Did your grandmother mention them? Never, I said. Well, we might as well see what this is about, Beverly decided. Send them in, but stay nearby in case we need assistance. Two people entered the office moments later. Gregory was tall and lean, probably in his mid-50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. Patricia was younger, maybe 40, with an efficient air about her. Both wore professional attire and carried leather briefcases. Miss Angela, Gregory said with a slight nod. Thank you for seeing us. We apologize for the unexpected visit, but given recent developments, we felt it necessary to make contact immediately. Who are you? I asked warily. We're representatives of Thistleford Security, a private investigation and asset protection firm, Patricia explained. We were retained by your grandmother 5 years ago with very specific instructions. Beverly leaned forward. What kind of instructions? Gregory opened his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope, handing it to me. Eleanor predicted there would be conflict over her will. She hired our firm to monitor the situation after her passing and intervene if necessary. This envelope contains additional information she wanted you to have, but only if certain conditions were met. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. It was thick, heavy with documents inside. My name was written across the front in Grandma's handwriting, with a note. Open only if they try to take what's yours. What conditions? Beverly asked. A formal legal challenge to the will, Patricia said. The moment your family filed their lawsuit, we were authorized to act. Eleanor was very clear about this. She didn't want Angela blindsided. I broke the seal and pulled out the contents. There were several documents, but the first was another letter from Grandma. I started reading, and with each paragraph, my eyes grew wider. Angela, if you're reading this, it means your parents have shown their true colors. I'm not surprised, though I hoped I might be wrong about them. What you need to know is that I've been documenting their behavior for years. I've hired investigators. I've kept records. Everything you need to protect yourself and expose their real motivations is in this packet. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them make you question your worth or your right to this inheritance. You earned it through love and genuine connection, things they've never understood. Use what I've given you. Fight back. Make them face consequences for once in their entitled lives. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. Beverly was reading over my shoulder. What else is in there? I spread the documents across her desk, financial records showing my parents' actual wealth. Private investigator reports detailing their plans to contest the will. Plans they'd apparently started making 3 years before Grandma died, based on assumptions about her declining health. Recorded conversations where they discussed strategies for manipulating me into surrendering the inheritance. And then I found the final document, and my breath caught. It was a detailed dossier on my father's business dealings, compiled by Grandma's investigators. Evidence of fraud, embezzlement, financial crimes going back over a decade. Gregory spoke quietly. Your grandmother wasn't sure you'd need this information. She hoped your family would accept her decision with grace, but she wanted you protected if they didn't. I looked up at Beverly, then at Gregory and Patricia. This changes everything, doesn't it? Beverly's expression was grim but determined. Yes, it does. The next morning, I sat in Beverly's conference room surrounded by documents that painted a devastating picture of my father's business practices. Gregory and Patricia had stayed late the previous evening, walking us through years of investigation findings. Now, in the harsh light of day, the full scope of my father's crimes was impossible to ignore. Your grandmother started suspecting something about 8 years ago, Gregory explained, pointing to a timeline he'd drawn on a whiteboard. She noticed discrepancies in things your father told her about his business versus what she observed. Being a sharp woman, she started asking questions. When he got defensive and evasive, she hired us, Patricia continued. What we found went far beyond anything she'd imagined. The documents showed systematic fraud at Cinderglow Textiles. My father had been creating false invoices, inflating expenses, and diverting company funds into personal accounts. He'd been doctoring financial statements, misleading investors, and covering his tracks by manipulating the company's accounting systems. The total amount embezzled over the years exceeded $4 million. Why didn't she report this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Beverly looked at me with sympathy. According to her notes, she considered it. But your father is still her son. She couldn't bring herself to send him to prison, no matter what he'd done. Instead, she decided to ensure you were protected and positioned to reveal the truth if he ever came after you. She knew he would, I said bitterly. She knew exactly what kind of people they are. Gregory nodded. The letter she left for you makes that clear. She hoped for the best but prepared for the worst, and her preparations were incredibly thorough. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing the evidence. Bank records, email communications, testimony from witnesses who'd been interviewed but weren't aware of the investigation's scope. Everything was meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and verified. Grandma had paid for the very best investigators, and they'd delivered. What do we do with this? I asked finally. Beverly tapped her pen against her legal pad, thinking. We have several options. The most straightforward would be to use this as leverage. If your parents drop the lawsuit, we don't reveal what we know. Blackmail. I felt uncomfortable with the idea. Not blackmail. Negotiation from a position of strength, Beverly corrected. But honestly, Angela, I don't recommend that approach. Your father has committed serious crimes. People have been harmed by his actions. The investors he defrauded, the employees whose pension funds he jeopardized. They deserve justice. Patricia leaned forward. There's also the matter of your mother and brother. They may not have known about the fraud initially, but our investigation shows they've benefited extensively from it. The house they live in, the cars, the lifestyle, all funded by stolen money. And Timothy? I asked. Willfully ignorant at best, Gregory said. Our investigators found emails where your father discussed certain financial matters in vague terms, and Timothy's responses suggest he knew something wasn't right, but chose not to look too closely. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at Portland's skyline. The city looked normal, peaceful, people going about their lives, unaware of the chaos in mine. I thought about Grandma, about how much courage it must have taken to document all of this, knowing it was her own son she was exposing. But she'd done it to protect me, to give me the tools I'd need. I want to think about this, I said finally. Before we make any decisions, I need time to process everything. Beverly nodded. Of course. But, Angela, there's something else you should know. Your parents' lawsuit? It's not just misguided. Based on what we've found, it's potentially fraudulent. They're claiming financial hardship as part of their argument, but these documents show they have substantial hidden assets. They're lying to the court. That information hit me like cold water. They weren't just greedy or entitled. They were actively committing fraud in their attempt to steal my inheritance. I left Beverly's office feeling overwhelmed and returned to my apartment. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides anxiety and fear. I felt anger. Clean, righteous anger at the people who'd spent my entire life making me feel small, and who were now trying to rob me of the one gift from the one person who truly loved me. My phone rang. It was Stephanie. Hey, she said. I heard through the family grapevine that the lawsuit is moving forward. How are you holding up? I almost laughed. It's complicated. Can I ask you something? Growing up, Did you ever see anything weird about my dad's business? There was a long pause. That's a random question. Why? Just something I'm looking into. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, this might be nothing. But I remember my dad, your Uncle Keith, refusing to invest in one of your father's ventures years ago. They had this huge fight about it at Thanksgiving. My dad said something about the numbers not adding up, about how the business model didn't make sense. Your dad got really angry and defensive. When was this? Maybe 10 years ago? I was in college. They didn't speak for like 2 years after that fight. After we hung up, I sat there thinking. Uncle Keith had seen something wrong. He'd sensed the fraud, even if he couldn't prove it. And my father had cut him off, rather than answer uncomfortable questions. How many other people had noticed something off over the years? How many had been silenced or pushed away? That evening, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Angela, we need to talk," she said. Her voice was strained. "Your father's attorney says you're not cooperating with discovery. You need to turn over your financial records." "Beverly is handling all legal communications," I replied coolly. "This is ridiculous. We're family. We shouldn't be fighting like this." She sighed dramatically. "Your father is under so much stress. The situation is affecting his health. Is that what you want?" The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. "What I want is for you to drop the lawsuit and leave me alone. You know we can't do that. It's not about the money, Angela. It's about principle. About what's right." "Then we agree on something," I said. "This is about what's right. And what's right is respecting Grandma's wishes. Your grandmother was manipulated. Stop." My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. "Don't talk about Grandma that way. She was the smartest, most capable person I've ever known. She knew exactly what she was doing." My mother's tone shifted, becoming harder. "You've changed, Angela. This money has changed you. You used to be such a sweet girl." "No, Mom. I used to be a scared girl who let you walk all over her. That's what you're really upset about, that I'm not rolling over this time." I hung up before she could respond. The next day, I met with Beverly again. I'd made my decision. "I want to fight," I told her. "Not just defend myself. I want to go on offense. I want to expose what my father has done. And I want to make sure my parents and Timothy face consequences for this lawsuit." Beverly smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let me show you what we can do." The counterattack began immediately. Beverly filed a motion to dismiss my family's lawsuit, attaching evidence of their fraudulent claims about financial hardship. The documents Gregory and Patricia had provided showed substantial hidden assets, offshore accounts, shell companies, investments registered under false names. My parents had been lying to the court, and we had proof. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing. I sat in the courtroom 3 days later, watching my father's attorney scramble to explain the discrepancies. My parents looked furious and confused. They'd expected this to be a straightforward proceeding, a step toward forcing me to share the inheritance. Instead, they were being questioned about their own finances. "Your Honor," my father's attorney stammered, "my clients were unaware of these particular assets. There may have been some confusion about what needed to be disclosed." "Confusion?" The judge's voice was sharp. She was in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book. "Mr. Edward, your client submitted sworn statements claiming near poverty. These documents show millions of dollars in hidden assets. That's not confusion, that's perjury." My mother grabbed my father's arm, whispering frantically. Timothy sat behind them, his face pale. Beverly stood. "Your Honor, we believe this fraudulent filing is just the beginning. We have evidence of long-term financial crimes committed by the plaintiffs, and we're prepared to present that evidence if the court wishes to see it." The judge looked at my father. "Mr. Edward, do you have anything to say?" My father stood slowly. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding. We can't explain. I'm sure you can, the judge interrupted. But you'll have that opportunity with investigators, not with me. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible criminal conduct. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo through the room. My father's attorney immediately requested a private conference. The judge agreed, and we all filed into her chambers. Let me be very clear, the judge said once the door closed. I don't appreciate people wasting my court's time with fraudulent claims. The evidence Miss Beverly has presented is damning. Mr. Edward, if even half of what I've seen today is accurate, your clients are facing serious legal consequences. My father's attorney was sweating. Your Honor, perhaps there's a way to resolve this without criminal charges. My clients are willing to withdraw their lawsuit completely, to sign agreements never to contest the will again. That ship has sailed, Beverly said calmly. The moment they filed fraudulent documents with this court, this stopped being a private family matter. My father finally spoke, his voice strained. Angela, please, we can work this out. You don't need to do this. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He was still imposing, still carried himself with that air of authority that had intimidated me my whole life. But now I saw through it. Behind the expensive suit and confident demeanor was just a frightened man who'd been caught. You did this to yourself, I said quietly. All of it. You could have accepted Grandma's decision. You could have been happy for me. Instead, you tried to destroy me to get what you wanted. And in the process, you revealed exactly who you are. My mother made a sobbing sound. How can you be so cruel? We're your parents. You're people who share my DNA, I corrected. Parents would have supported me. Parents would have celebrated my good fortune. Parents would have loved me regardless of money. You've never been parents to me. The meeting ended shortly after. The judge made it clear she would be following through with her referral to the district attorney. My family left the courthouse looking shell-shocked. I felt strangely calm. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Angela, it's Timothy. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Do you have any idea what you've done? I defended myself against your baseless lawsuit, I replied. You've destroyed our family. Dad's business is going to collapse once this gets out. Mom is having panic attacks. My kids are going to grow up knowing their grandfather is a criminal. Was it worth it? Was the money really worth all this? This isn't about money, Timothy. It never was. This is about all of you showing me exactly what you value most. And it's not family. It's not love. It's wealth and status and control. You're insane, he hissed. You've always been unstable, always dramatic. We should have fought harder to get Grandma evaluated while she was alive. Clearly mental illness runs in the family. I almost laughed. Even now, even after everything, he was trying to make me the problem. Goodbye, Timothy. Don't call me again. I blocked his number. Over the next week, things moved quickly. The district attorney's office launched a formal investigation into my father's business practices. Cinderglow Textiles' board of directors was notified of the allegations. My father was placed on immediate leave pending the investigation's outcome. The story hit the local business news. Prominent textile executive under investigation for fraud. The article was carefully worded, legally cautious, but the implications were clear. My father's reputation was in tatters. I received dozens of messages from extended family members. Most were angry, accusing me of ruining the family name for petty revenge. A few, like Stephanie and Uncle Keith, expressed support. Uncle Keith even called to apologize for not pushing harder when he'd first suspected something was wrong years ago. I convinced myself it wasn't my business, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I should have protected you better. You were just a kid. It's not your fault, I assured him. This was always going to come out eventually. Grandma just made sure I had the tools to protect myself when it did. Beverly kept me updated on the legal proceedings. The evidence Grandma had compiled was devastating. Prosecutors were building a case that could result in significant prison time for my father. My mother and Timothy, while not directly implicated in the fraud, faced potential charges related to the fraudulent lawsuit and possibly as accessories after the fact. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. Beverly called me urgently one afternoon. Angela, you need to come to my office right now. We've just received information that changes everything. What kind of information? The kind I need to explain in person. How soon can you get here? 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Beverly, Gregory, and Patricia again. They all looked grave. What's going on? I asked. Patricia slid a folder across the table. We've continued monitoring your family's communications, as authorized by your grandmother's contract with us. This morning, we intercepted emails that suggest your parents are planning something drastic. I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, text messages, phone transcripts. As I read, my blood ran cold. My parents were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. They'd been consulting with attorneys about having me evaluated, about using the stress of recent events as evidence of instability. They'd found a psychiatrist willing to testify that my refusal to share the inheritance, my willingness to destroy family relationships, and my erratic behavior all pointed to serious mental illness requiring intervention. They're going to try to have you committed, Beverly said bluntly. Or at minimum, to have a conservator appointed to control your finances. They've already filed preliminary paperwork under seal. I felt the room spin. Can they do that? It's extremely difficult, and their case is weak, Beverly assured me. But it's also dangerous. If they can get a sympathetic judge, if they can present a convincing enough picture, they might succeed in at least freezing your assets pending evaluation. Gregory's expression was dark. This is beyond unethical. It's potentially criminal, using mental health systems as a weapon to gain financial control. How do we stop them? I asked. Beverly's smile was cold. We beat them to it, and we make sure everyone knows exactly what they're trying to do. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. Beverly worked with a team of attorneys to prepare our response. We filed emergency motions in court, petitioned for restraining orders, and began the process of making my family's scheme public before they could execute it. More importantly, we went on offense. Gregory and Patricia had been busy. They'd compiled a comprehensive dossier, not just on my father's fraud, but on the entire pattern of my family's behavior. Recorded conversations where my mother had discussed manipulating me. Emails from Timothy to financial advisors asking about the best ways to manage family members with sudden wealth. Text messages between my parents strategizing about how to present me as unstable. It was all there, documented and verified, a roadmap of their manipulation. Beverly called a press conference. I was terrified at first. Going public meant inviting scrutiny, exposing private family matters, risking public judgment. But Beverly convinced me it was necessary. They're counting on you being too intimidated to fight back publicly, she explained. They think you'll be embarrassed, that you'll back down rather than air dirty laundry. We need to flip that script. The press conference took place in Beverly's office building. Local news stations sent reporters. Business journalists who'd been following the Cinderglow Textiles story showed up. Even a few national outlets sent stringers. I sat at a table with Beverly, Gregory, and Patricia flanking me. Cameras flashed as I adjusted my microphone. Beverly spoke first, laying out the basic facts. Eleanor's will, the lawsuit, the discovery of fraud, the fraudulent claims made to the court. Then she dropped the bombshell about the competency proceedings. Angela's family is attempting to use mental health systems as a weapon, Beverly said clearly. They want to have her declared incompetent because she refused to hand over an inheritance that was legally and rightfully hers. This is an abuse of legal systems designed to protect vulnerable people, and it must be exposed. Then it was my turn to speak. My hands shook as I unfolded my prepared statement. My name is Angela, and my grandmother left me her estate because I was the only family member who loved her for who she was, not what she could give me. Since her death, my parents and brother have sued me, lied about me, threatened me, and now are trying to have me declared mentally ill, all because I won't surrender money that my grandmother specifically wanted me to have. I looked directly into the cameras. I'm sharing this publicly because I want other people in similar situations to know they don't have to accept abuse from family members. Wealth doesn't make people evil, but it reveals who they really are. My family has shown me exactly who they are, and I'm done being silent about it. The questions came rapid fire after that. How did I feel about my father's crimes? Was I worried about family relationships? Did I regret my grandmother's decision? I answered honestly. I was heartbroken that my father had hurt people through his fraud. I grieved the family relationships I'd never really had. I treasured my grandmother's gift and the love behind it. The press conference was covered extensively. By that evening, the story had spread across local and regional news. Heiress exposes family's plot to declare her incompetent. Grandmother's million gift sparks family war. Woman fights back against parents' fraud scheme. The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Social media filled with comments from people sharing their own stories of family manipulation and financial abuse. Strangers reached out to offer encouragement. Support groups for estranged adult children contacted me about speaking at their events. My family, predictably, was furious. My mother gave her own interview to a different news outlet, painting herself as a heartbroken parent whose ungrateful daughter had turned against her family. She cried on camera, talking about how they'd sacrificed everything to raise me, how they'd supported my dreams only to be repaid with cruelty and false accusations. But her story fell apart quickly. Journalists started digging into my father's business history. Former employees came forward with their own stories of suspicious accounting practices. Investors who'd lost money began connecting dots they'd previously dismissed. The investigation into Cinderglow Textiles expanded. Federal authorities got involved when evidence suggested some of the fraud had crossed state lines. My father's attorney stopped returning calls from the media. A week after the press conference, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. This time, I was prepared. Beverly had arranged for all my calls to be recorded. Angela. It was my father's voice, and he sounded defeated. We need to talk. Any communication needs to go through Beverly, I said. Please, just 5 minutes. Person to person, father to daughter. Something in his tone made me pause. I'm recording this. I know. I expected you would be. He took a deep breath. I'm calling to say you win. We're dropping everything. The competency petition is withdrawn. We won't contest the will anymore. We'll leave you alone. What's the catch? No catch. We're done. The investigation is going to destroy me anyway. Cinderglow's board fired me this morning. The prosecutors are talking about a plea deal, 5 to 10 years if I cooperate fully. My attorney says I should take it because a trial could mean 20 years or more. I felt nothing hearing this. No satisfaction, no sadness, just emptiness. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that you were right. About all of it. Your grandmother saw something in you that I never did. She saw strength, integrity, the ability to stand up for yourself. I saw weakness because you were kind. I saw someone to control because you wanted approval. He paused. I'm sorry, Angela. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry for who I've been your entire life. Sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter. You deserved better. Yes, I said quietly. I did. Will you ever forgive us? I thought about Grandma, about her letters, about the life she'd wanted me to build. I don't know. Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean letting you back into my life. I understand. His voice cracked slightly. Be happy, Angela. Build something good with what Eleanor gave you. Don't let our poison infect your future. He hung up. I sat there for a long time, phone in my hand, processing the conversation. It didn't change anything, not really. The damage was done, the relationships destroyed. But hearing him admit the truth, hearing him acknowledge what he'd done, it provided a kind of closure I hadn't expected. Beverly called an hour later. Your father's attorney just contacted me. They're formally withdrawing all legal actions against you. It's over, Angela. You won. Yeah, I said. I guess I did. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like surviving. 3 months after my father's plea deal was finalized, I stood in the empty house that had once been my grandmother's home. The estate sale had been completed the week before. All of Grandma's belongings distributed according to her wishes, or sold to fund the various charitable bequests she'd specified in her will. Now it was just me in this house where I'd spent so many happy afternoons as a child, before everything became complicated. Beverly had suggested I sell the property. It's a beautiful house, but maintaining it is expensive, and you might not want the memories, she'd said. But I couldn't bring myself to let it go. This house represented the only genuine love I'd known growing up. Every room held memories of Grandma teaching me to bake, showing me her garden, listening to my teenage problems without judgment. This was where I'd learned what unconditional love looked like. I decided to renovate it instead. Turn it into something new while honoring what it had been. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Coffee tomorrow? I'm in town visiting my parents. Over the past months, Stephanie had become more than a cousin. She'd become a genuine friend. She'd stood by me through the worst of the public scandal, had testified about my father's suspicious behavior when prosecutors needed it, had helped me navigate the complex emotions of watching my family implode. Definitely, I texted back. My treat. The next afternoon, we met at a cafe in downtown Portland. Stephanie looked good. She'd recently been promoted at her own job and was glowing with the confidence that came from being valued for her work. So, she said, as we settled into a corner booth with our lattes, how are you really doing? Not the public relations version, the actual truth. I considered the question. Honestly, I'm still processing everything. Some days I feel strong and vindicated. Other days I feel like I lost my entire family, and even though they were terrible, that loss still hurts. Stephanie nodded. That's completely normal. They may have been awful, but they were still your family. Grief doesn't have to be rational. Have you heard anything from them? My parents talk to your mom occasionally. She's moved to Arizona to live with her sister. Your father is in federal prison in California. He got 7 years in the plea deal. Timothy apparently sold his house and moved somewhere cheaper. His wife filed for divorce. I absorbed this information. Part of me felt guilty about the destruction I'd caused, but a larger part recognized that I hadn't caused anything. I'd simply refused to be their victim, and that refusal had exposed truths that were always there. My mom says your mother is telling people that you orchestrated everything, Stephanie continued. That you manipulated Grandma Eleanor, that you planted evidence against your father, that you're some kind of evil mastermind who destroyed the family for money. I laughed, though it came out bitter. Of course she is. Taking responsibility would require acknowledging her own role in all this. For what it's worth, nobody who actually knows you believes any of that. That's worth a lot, actually. Thank you. We talked for another hour, discussing lighter topics. Stephanie's new relationship, my plans for Grandma's house, a trip I was considering to Europe. It felt wonderfully normal, this conversation between two people who genuinely liked each other, with no hidden agendas or manipulation. As we were leaving, Stephanie hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, you know. It took real courage to stand up to them. I had good weapons, I said. Grandma made sure of that. She gave you tools, But you're the one who used them. Don't discount that. After Stephanie left, I drove to meet with Gregory and Patricia. Their security firm had completed its contract with Grandma's estate, but they'd agreed to help me with a new project I'd been developing. "We've finished the preliminary research," Gregory said, spreading documents across the conference table in their office. "There are at least 15 families in Oregon who've experienced similar situations. Adult children being manipulated or legally attacked by parents over inheritance disputes." I scanned the summaries they'd prepared. Stories like mine, though each with unique details. Parents weaponizing the legal system, siblings turned against each other over money, elderly relatives being isolated and controlled. "I want to help them," I said. "Not with money, necessarily, but with resources. Legal support, investigation services, counseling, all the things that made it possible for me to fight back." Patricia smiled. "That's what we thought. We've drafted a proposal for a nonprofit organization focused specifically on inheritance dispute support, education about estate planning, legal advocacy, mental health resources." "The Eleanor Foundation," I said, referring to the name I'd chosen for the organization. "After my grandmother." "It's a good legacy," Gregory agreed. "She'd be proud." We spent the next 2 hours discussing logistics, budgets, and strategies. I'd allocated $2 million of my inheritance to fund the foundation for its first 5 years. Beverly had agreed to serve on the board and help recruit other attorneys willing to do pro bono or reduced cost work for clients who qualified. It felt right, using part of what Grandma had given me to help others in similar situations. It honored her memory while creating something positive from all the pain. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine peace. The anger was still there, buried deep. Probably would be for years. The grief over losing my family remained raw. But underneath those darker emotions was a growing sense of purpose and possibility. Grandma had given me more than money. She'd given me the chance to become the person I was meant to be. 6 months later, the Eleanor Foundation officially launched. We held a small event at a community center in Portland, nothing fancy or elaborate. I'd specifically avoided anything that looked like I was flaunting wealth. This wasn't about me. It was about the mission. About 30 people attended. Some were professionals interested in partnering with us. Attorneys, therapists, financial advisors. Others were individuals who'd experienced family financial abuse and wanted to share their stories or access our resources. I stood at a podium, more nervous than I'd been at the press conference months earlier. This felt more personal, more real. "Thank you all for coming," I began. 6 months ago, I stood in a courtroom watching my family try to steal an inheritance my grandmother had specifically left to me. I was able to fight back because my grandmother had the foresight and resources to prepare me for that battle. Most people in similar situations don't have those advantages. The Eleanor Foundation exists to change that. I outlined our services. Free legal consultations for people facing inheritance disputes or family financial manipulation. Connection to investigators for those who suspected fraud or abuse. Support groups for people navigating family estrangement. And educational resources about estate planning and protecting vulnerable adults. "Money doesn't make people evil," I continued, echoing words I'd said at the press conference. "But it reveals who they really are. And when that revelation is painful, when you discover that family members value money more than relationships, you need support. You need people who understand. That's what we're building here." The response was overwhelming. By the end of the event, 20 people had signed up for our services. 5 attorneys had volunteered to take pro bono cases. A therapist who specialized in family trauma had offered to run support groups. And the media coverage, while smaller than before, was entirely positive. Heiress creates foundation to help others fight family financial abuse. The story ran in regional papers and online news sites. I received hundreds of emails in the days following the launch. People thanking me, people sharing their own stories, people asking for help. Each message reinforced that this work mattered, that the pain I'd experienced could be transformed into something meaningful. One email in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Jennifer, who'd been estranged from her family for 3 years after refusing to sign over her inheritance from her grandfather to her parents. "I thought I was crazy," she wrote. "Everyone told me I was selfish, that I was destroying family relationships over money. But it wasn't about money. It was about respect, about my grandfather's wishes being honored, about not being controlled. Reading your story helped me realize I wasn't alone. The foundation you've created is going to save people years of self-doubt and isolation. Thank you." I read that email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was why I'd gone public. This was why the pain and exposure had been worth it. A few weeks after the foundation launch, Beverly called with unexpected news. "Your father's attorney reached out," she said. "Apparently your father wants to speak with you. Not about money or legal matters. He just wants to talk." "Why would I agree to that?" "You don't have to. I told his attorney that any communication would be entirely at your discretion. But I wanted you to know he asked." I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted to ignore the request, to let my father serve his sentence without any contact. But another part, the part that was trying to heal, wondered if hearing what he had to say might provide additional closure. Finally, I agreed to a phone call, supervised and recorded. When my father's voice came through the line, he sounded older, tired. Prison had aged him. "Angela, thank you for taking my call. I'm not promising anything beyond listening," I said. "I know. I don't deserve even that much." He paused. "I've been in therapy here. Court mandated at first, but I've continued it voluntarily. My therapist has been helping me understand the patterns of behavior that led to all this. And I'm realizing how much damage I've done. Not just to you, but to everyone around me. I built my entire life on control and manipulation. I taught Timothy those same patterns. I enabled your mother's worst behaviors. I destroyed a company and hurt innocent people because I convinced myself I deserved more than I'd legitimately earned." I stayed silent, letting him continue. "The therapist asked me to make a list of everyone I'd harmed and what I'd done to them. Your section was 3 pages long. 3 pages of ways I'd failed you, belittled you, tried to control you. And the worst part is that I thought I was being a good father. I genuinely believed that pushing you, criticizing you, holding you to impossible standards was helping you." "It wasn't," I said quietly. "I know that now. I know that you succeeded despite me, not because of me. And I know that the strong, capable woman you've become is entirely your own achievement. Your grandmother saw that when I couldn't. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that what happened wasn't your fault. You didn't cause this family to fall apart. We were broken long before Grandma Eleanor died. You just finally had the strength and resources to stop accepting that brokenness as normal." I closed my eyes, processing his words. "Are you expecting forgiveness?" "No. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost, what I threw away, what I destroyed. And I'm sorry." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. His apology didn't change anything concrete. It didn't undo the pain or repair the relationship. But it did provide something valuable. Confirmation that I'd been right all along. That the way they'd treated me had been wrong. That I deserved better. 1 year after Grandma's passing, I stood in the newly renovated community center that had once been her house. The transformation was complete. What had been her living room was now a meeting space for support groups. Her kitchen, where she taught me to bake, was now a break room for staff and volunteers. Her garden had been expanded into a peaceful outdoor area where clients could find quiet moments during difficult processes. The Eleanor Foundation's main office occupied the 2nd floor. We now had 5 full-time staff members and a roster of over 30 volunteer professionals. In our first year, We'd helped 43 families navigate inheritance disputes, prevented 2 questionable conservatorships, and connected hundreds of people with resources and support. We were holding an open house to celebrate the center's completion. Unlike the initial launch, this event was larger, more celebratory. I'd invited everyone who'd supported me through my own ordeal: Beverly, Gregory, Patricia, Stephanie, Uncle Keith, and the handful of other relatives who'd stood by me. As people gathered in the main meeting room, I looked around at what we'd built. The walls were painted in warm, welcoming colors. Photos of Grandma decorated one wall, pictures of her gardening, laughing, living her life with joy and dignity. A plaque near the entrance read, "Eleanor's House, a place of healing, justice, and new beginnings." Beverly approached me, holding a glass of sparkling cider. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud of this." "I hope so," I said. "Sometimes I still can't believe any of this is real." "Believe it. You've created something that's genuinely helping people. That's a remarkable legacy." The afternoon included tours of the facility, testimonials from people we'd helped, and a presentation about our future plans. We were expanding our services to include youth programs, education for young adults about financial literacy, healthy family dynamics, and recognizing manipulative behaviors. During the reception afterward, a young woman approached me nervously. She looked about 19, with uncertain eyes and fidgeting hands. "Miss Angela, I'm Kayla. I just wanted to thank you. Your foundation helped my mom last year when my grandparents tried to force her to sign over her inheritance. We would have lost everything if your attorneys hadn't stepped in." I took her hand warmly. "I'm so glad we could help. How is your mom doing now?" "She's good. Really good, actually. She used part of the inheritance to start her own business. We're finally stable for the first time in my life." Tears welled in her eyes. "And she's seeing a therapist, working through all the family stuff. She says she wants to break the cycle, to make sure I never feel like she did." Conversations like that one happened several times throughout the afternoon. People sharing their stories, expressing gratitude, talking about how the foundation had changed their lives. Each one reinforced that the pain I'd endured had been transformed into something genuinely valuable. As the event wound down and people started leaving, Stephanie found me standing in Grandma's garden. "Quite a day," she said, joining me on the bench. "Yeah, it feels surreal sometimes. A year ago, I was sitting in Beverly's office, terrified and overwhelmed. Now I'm running a foundation and helping people." "You've come a long way." Stephanie smiled. "Have you heard the latest about your parents?" I shook my head. I'd stopped asking for updates months ago, trying to focus on moving forward rather than looking back. "Your mom is apparently telling everyone who'll listen that she always supported the foundation, that it was partially her idea. She's trying to rehabilitate her image by association with your success." I laughed, though it was tinged with sadness. "Of course she is. That's very on brand for her. Does it bother you?" "Not really. She can tell herself whatever story she needs to. I know the truth. The people who matter know the truth. That's enough." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the garden Grandma had loved so much. "Do you ever regret it?" Stephanie asked quietly. "Fighting back, going public, all of it?" I considered the question carefully. "No. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my family chose money over relationships, but fighting back, exposing the truth, creating something positive from that pain? No, I don't regret those choices at all." That night, after everyone had left and I was alone in the house, I sat in what had been Grandma's favorite chair and pulled out the letters she'd left me. I'd read them dozens of times, but they still provided comfort. "Don't let them take it from you, Angela," she'd written. "Build the life you deserve." I'd done that. Despite the pain, despite the loss, despite the public scrutiny and family destruction, I'd built something good, The Eleanor Foundation would help hundreds of people over the years, maybe thousands. Grandma's love and foresight would ripple outward, touching lives she'd never known. My family had tried to destroy me to get what they thought they deserved. Instead, they destroyed themselves and inadvertently helped me become the person I was always meant to be. I pulled out my journal and wrote a final entry about my revenge journey. They wanted to break me, but I refused to break. They wanted to take what was mine, but I stood my ground. They wanted me to stay small and controllable, but I grew into someone they couldn't recognize or manipulate. In trying to punish me for being strong, they revealed their own weakness. And in that revelation, I found my freedom. My father served 5 years of his 7-year sentence before being released on parole. He moved to a small town in Northern California, where he worked at a hardware store and attended court-mandated therapy sessions. His reputation in the business world was destroyed beyond repair, his name synonymous with fraud and embezzlement. The retirement he'd envisioned, built on stolen money and manipulation, vanished entirely. He lived modestly, quietly, a ghost of the man who'd once commanded boardrooms and intimidated his daughter. My mother never recovered from the scandal. Her social circle in Portland evaporated once the truth emerged, and even in Arizona, living with her sister, she remained largely isolated. She attempted to reconnect with distant relatives, spinning elaborate stories about being the real victim, but most people saw through the manipulation. She spent her final years bitter and alone, unable to accept her role in the family's destruction, convinced until the end that she'd been wronged, rather than being the one who wronged others. Timothy's life unraveled completely. His divorce was expensive and contentious, his ex-wife having finally recognized the toxic patterns he'd learned from our father. He lost custody of his children, except for supervised visits. Unable to find work in finance after his association with our father's fraud became public, he eventually moved to a different state and worked a series of unfulfilling jobs, his grand ambitions reduced to simply surviving. He never reached out to apologize, never acknowledged his role in trying to destroy me. Some people, I learned, would rather preserve their ego than repair their relationships. As for me, I stood in Eleanor's garden 5 years after that day, watching morning light filter through the trees she'd planted decades earlier. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined, helping over 200 families navigate inheritance disputes and family financial abuse. I'd found peace not through revenge, but through transformation, turning pain into purpose, betrayal into boundaries, and loss into something that genuinely mattered. Grandma had given me more than money. She'd given me the tools to build a life defined by my own choices rather than others' expectations. And in the end, that was the greatest inheritance of all.